Sup everyone, Thomas here, aka Restroom's Trainer, and welcome back to another one of my videos. So a couple months ago, the Switch 2 came out, and with it came Mario Kart World. And while the reception is somewhat mixed, I personally really enjoyed it. The game has a great selection of tracks, both old and new, and naturally, it got me thinking about what previous tracks on the Mario Kart series would I like to see get added to the game in a possible future DLC. So naturally, I started making a list. And while the original plan was to simply list a bunch of retro tracks that I'd like to see return, me being me, things sort of spiraled into making an entire DLC in a way. And by that, I mean not only did I create a list of tracks, I also made an entire map, placed said tracks around the map, connected them all, and even planned out both Grand Prix and Knockout tours. So yeah, not quite the original plan, but we'll make it work. Now the first step in deciding what tracks to add is obviously deciding how many tracks to add. I chose 32, since that's how many tracks were in a lot of the previous games, including 8 prior to its original DLC. Now yes, Mario Kart World only has 30 tracks, but that's because both Peach Stadium and Crown City are revisited with different layouts. Now there is actually a way to bring down my list from 32 to 30, given some of the tracks I chose, but I'll mention that later. With the amount of tracks settled, let's cover a few other rules as well. First off, obviously I'm not picking anything that's already in the world, but I'm also not going to pick any tracks that were remade in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe and the Booster Course Pass. Keyword: remade. Any track that originated from 8 Deluxe, like Shago Falls or Bone Dry Dunes, is allowed. Though I'm not allowing the crossover tracks, like Hyrule Circuit, Animal Crossing, Mute City, etc. Now I do kind of break this rule, sort of, depending on who you ask, but we'll go back to that later. And while I said I won't count tracks remade in 8 Deluxe, I will make an exception for any tracks originating from Tour, because, well, Tour. Though I obviously won't include any of the city tracks like New York Minute. Another thing is that I also won't count any of the SNES tracks, and that's because I have another plan for them that I'll get to later. I also made a point to try and somewhat balance the amount of tracks coming from each game. This was something I didn't bother with initially, until I realised that I had 7 tracks from Super Circuit, with Double Dash, DS and Wii only having 3. I ended up with every game having 4 tracks each, except for Mario Kart 8, which fittingly has 8, being divided among the base game, DLC and Booster Course Pass. And after going through all that, this is a list of all the remaining tracks to pick from. As you can see, it's somewhat limited, especially with there being several Rainbow Roads, Bowser's Castles, Mario Circuits, and even the Luigi Circuits. For obvious reasons, I had to pick one of each. Lastly, before we begin, don't forget to like and subscribe, it really helps this channel out, as I'm hoping to reach 1,000 subscribers by the end of the year. But with all that said, let's get started. I think the best place to start is with the map itself, since if they do actually make a DLC for this game, they're not going to place new tracks around the same world, they're going to make a new island to race on. Now, it could just be me, but I always thought that the world map in Mario Kart World was somewhat based on a mushroom, and so it made sense that this new island would probably resemble a different Mario item, and so I figured a star made the most sense. And after a quick sketch or two, this is what I came up with as the base. Next, I added some biomes, before placing each of the tracks around the map. And side note, I picked all the tracks before designing the map, and I'm not going to try and make the track layout symmetrical like the map in World does. As for the tracks themselves, I think the best way to explore them would be in cup progression. For simplicity's sake, I'm going to use the same cup names as the base game, despite the fact that realistically they'd have different names. Anyway, let's start with the Mushroom Cup. The Mushroom Cup begins here, at Figure 8 Circuit. Now right away, I imagine some of you are complaining about me picking arguably the most bland and generic track in the series. I was originally planning on using Peach Circuit from Super Circuit in this spot, but when I realised that I had 7 Super Circuit tracks, and only 3 DS tracks, I made a substitute or 3, and Peach Circuit got replaced with Figure 8 Circuit to balance things out. Yes, the track is incredibly simple, but it's the first track, so I don't think it matters too much. Next, we move up north to our next track, Moo Moo Farm. A track that quite frankly should have been in the base game instead of Moo Moo Meadows, since we had that in the previous game. But regardless, Moo Moo Farm was kind of one of the few tracks available that fit a grassy plains area that isn't a circuit track, so I figured it had to be included. Moving over west, we reached Mario Circuit. Now there were a good handful of Mario Circuits to choose from. Mario Raceway from 64, the Mario Circuit from Double Dash, the one from 7, and of course the one from 8. But for pretty obvious reasons, we're not picking that one. Out of all of them, the version I chose was Mario Circuit from Mario Kart Wii. Now admittedly, there is some partial bias here, as I played a lot of Mario Kart Wii as a kid, but still, I'd really like to see how this track would be remade in World. And finally, to finish off the Mushroom Cup, we head further west towards the mountains, where we'll find Daisy Hills. A track that I'm sure a lot of people have wanted to see get remade for a while, and I think it works quite well here. It'd also just be really fun exploring the town in free roam. The Flower Cup is next, and similar to Base World, we'll be starting in the desert. More specifically, at what I consider my favourite desert track in the entire series, Dry Dry Ruins. I absolutely love Dry Dry Ruins, and spent a lot of time racing on it back in Mario Kart Wii, and I remember getting a pretty good time in time trials, and so I knew that I had to pick this track to appear here. Now sure, the Flower Cup might seem a bit early for Dry Dry Ruins, since it was in the Special Cup in Mario Kart Wii. But I don't think Nintendo really cares about that sort of thing when it comes to World. Just look at the Lightning Cup. Anyway, continuing on with the Flower Cup, we head south to another desert track, being Yoshi Desert from Mario Kart Super Circuit. Now Yoshi Desert always felt like one of the more forgettable tracks from Super Circuit for me, but Super Circuit as a whole always felt like one of the more forgotten and underappreciated games in the series. Combined with the fact that Super Circuit is probably the very first video game I ever remember playing, and you can see why I initially wanted to include even more Super Circuit tracks. But while I did swap a few out, Yoshi Desert remains, and that's probably because of the available tracks, only 3 of them are desert themed. The one I didn't include was Bone Dry Dunes from 8. Moving on, we continue south, now leaving the desert for Luigi Circuit. Now there's 3 different Luigi circuits to choose from. Well, technically 4 because of Luigi Raceway, which realistically should count despite the name difference, but regardless, I originally picked the GBA version, since it felt like the most unique. But as I said before, I initially had too many Super Circuit tracks, and so Luigi Circuit got swapped out for a different Luigi Circuit. The question was, which one? Right away, Luigi Raceway wasn't considered, since I had enough 64 tracks, which left the GameCube version and the Wii version. And I ended up choosing the Wii version, not because I think it's the better version, but actually for a different reason that I'll get into later. I chose this spot for Luigi Circuit since it helps connect several of the surrounding tracks while keeping its distance from the other circuit tracks. And lastly, to finish the Flower Cup, we head southeast to Mushroom Bridge. If you see my video where I ranked all the tracks in Mario Kart Deluxe, then you'll know that I really like city tracks. So obviously I was going to pick Mushroom Bridge. Plus I just think this would be really fun to drive around in free roam. Now let's move on to the Star Cup. Similar to the Star Cup in World, this is going to be the snow themed cup of the DLC. The cup in question starts here at Frappe Snowland. Now I'm admittedly not too familiar with Frappe Snowland, as I hadn't played Mario Kart 64 until getting footage for this video, And I haven't played much Mario Kart DS either, where the track got remade. But it seems like a good choice, since the other snow tracks that are available are either mountains or ice themed. So Frappe Snowland does stand out a bit. Next, we move northwest to our next track, Sherbet Land. The N64 version if it wasn't already obvious. Now I have a good amount of nostalgia for this track thanks to its appearance in Mario Kart Wii. And on top of that, we didn't really have a track like this in Base World, despite having the perfect area for it. So it seemed like a good choice. Heading east, we reach a very similar track, being Ice Outpost from Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. Now I was initially a little hesitant to include Ice Outpost, since I thought it might be a bit too similar to Sherbet Land. But I need to pick some tracks from 8 Deluxe, and besides, the only other snow/ice themed track I hadn't chosen was Mount Wario, which, despite being my favourite track in 8 Deluxe, outside of the Booster Course Pass, would not work in World. It's simply too big, and would honestly feel more like an intermission track in this game. So Ice Outpost seemed like the better choice. Besides, I do think it's at least somewhat different enough from Sherbet Land for it to not be a big deal. And finally, we head northwest to the top of the map, where we'll find Merry Mountain from Mario Kart Tour. Now an idea I had for the Star Cup as a whole is to slowly climb in elevation, starting at a somewhat flat tundra at Frappe Snowland, then moving up to Sherbet Land and Ice Outpost, before finally ascending to the top of the mountain where Merry Mountain is. I could also see Merry Mountain being similar to Starview Peak, where its high elevation gives it a great view of the entire map, especially given its geographic position at the top of the map. Plus the train tracks here would be great for rail grinding like in Whistle Stop Summit, so I think this track could work quite well in World. Now for the Shell Cup, which starts down here. Now I almost chose to put Koopa Beach from Mario Kart 64 here, especially considering what the next track is, but because of a certain track in the base game, and more specifically because of a certain name change, I decided against it. Which, real quick, I have to ask, why is this track called Koopa Beach? It's a remake of Koopa Beach 2 from SNES. Not Koopa Troopa Beach, just Koopa Beach. I can understand dropping the 2, but why add the Trooper in there? Especially when there's already a track called Koopa Beach. Koopa Beach works just fine. Hell, Koopa Beach 1 is right next to it, so you wouldn't have to worry about adding the numbers. Right, rant over. Let's get back on track. So there were a couple tracks that could have gone here. While Cheep Island looked promising, I have a different Cheep track in mind for later. So I decided to go with Sugar Beach from Super Circuit. Now yes, this is a fairly simple track without much going on. But Koopa Beach 2 was even more basic and simple, and look at what they did to that. I'm sure Nintendo could do something cool with this. Moving west over the sea, we reach Sunshine Airport. And now you can see why Koopa Beach seemed like a great choice for the last track. Anyway, I think Sunshine Airport could work quite well in this game. Not only does the track not rely too much on anti-gravity, meaning there wouldn't need to be much changed, but the fact that the karts in this game have extendable wings instead of a glider makes an airport track like this somewhat appropriate. Plus it would be really cool to drive around the airport in free roam. Heading north, we reach Delfino Square, a track I really enjoyed racing on in Mario Kart Wii. And I'm sure a few of you are yelling at your screens saying, Delfino Square should be on old Delfino. To which I say, Peach Beach. Anyway, I think it would be really cool to see this track reimagined for a possible World DLC. Plus, it would just be really cool to explore the town in free roam. Now remember earlier when I said I wouldn't include any crossover tracks, and that I kind of maybe broke that rule? Well, I bring that up because the next track is Woohoo Island Loop. Now the reason I made an exception for the Woohoo Island tracks, because spoiler alert, the other one's here too, is partially because I feel that Woohoo Island is a lot less immersion breaking than say, Mute City or Hyrule Circuit. And I know I've said this several times before, but it would just be so fucking cool to explore Woohoo Island in free roam. The only major issue I can think of, aside from the possible immersion breaking, would be that they might be a bit too big, but I honestly wouldn't mind it. Onto the Banana Cup, which starts over here at Cheep Lagoon. Now I'm sure a lot of you are pointing out that the track is half underwater, and underwater driving isn't a thing in World. To which I say, this is what Wario's Galleon looked like back on 3DS, and here's what it looks like in World. They can absolutely make it work. Plus, it's nice to have a tropical island track that isn't on a beach. Moving over to the mainland, we enter the jungle section of the map, where we'll find Lakeside Park from Super Circuit. So you remember Riverside Park in the Booster Course Pass? Well, this is basically its big brother, and I'd really like to see it get remade. Heading south, we reach another jungle track, being DK's Jungle Parkway from Mario Kart 64. This is another track I have nostalgia for thanks to Mario Kart Wii, and I think it would work really well in a game like World. I could easily imagine being able to rag ride along the bridge near the end, and a large jump could probably be turned into either a brief gliding section or a brief water section where we drive across the river. There's definitely a lot they could do with this track. Heading further south, we reach this area that I'm sure a lot of you are wondering about. This is actually Sweet Canyon, and my idea was for this whole area to serve as a sort of counterpart to Sky High Sundae in the base game. You could even place the battle course Sweet Kingdom around here as well. An interesting detail to notice is that if we go back to DK's Jungle Parkway, we can see that the water here is yellow. And if we head back to Sweet Canyon, we can see that the water here is also yellow. And so having them be just downstream from each other felt appropriate. Now for the Leaf Cup, which starts over here in the mountains at Swamp Ruins. I think this track could translate quite well onto World, and while there are anti-gravity sections, they're pretty much all wall ride sections, and wall riding is already a thing in World, so I'm sure they can make it work in one form or another. Heading west, we reach this small forest section, and a small forest hidden away in the mountains sounds like the perfect spot for Ninja Hideaway. Now if you've seen my Mario Kart 8 Deluxe ranking, then you'll know that Ninja Hideaway is my favourite track, and it's for that reason that I was initially hesitant to include it, since it would seem like me playing favourites. But I was running out of ideas, and honestly, this track could work really well here, especially in free roam. Going southeast from here, we head down to, or rather up to, our next track, Cloudtop Cruise. Now obviously, this track takes place in the sky, so I imagine it as a sort of counterpart to Great Question Block Ruins, and you'd probably reach it in a similar manner. Now I can see some people bringing up the Thunderstorm section, which uses anti-gravity, though I imagine they could quite easily alter this section to work without it. And for the final track of this cup, we make our way back over to Woohoo Island, this time for the Woohoo Mountain Loop. Now once again, I could see the track length possibly being an issue for some people, especially given the somewhat long open ocean section to get here, though I still think it could be interesting. Moving on to the Lightning Cup, we start over here in the forest section at Wild Woods. Now I was initially hesitant to include Wild Woods, and that's pretty much entirely because of the anti-gravity section. Now I could absolutely see how you could get around this. I mean, just look at Bowser's Castle, or Rainbow Road, or Great Question Block Ruins. You could very easily replace the anti-gravity section with a launch like those tracks. The bigger problem, that's where the starting line is, so you'd have to move the starting line somewhere else. Another possible issue is that Wild Woods might be a bit too similar to Acorn Heights in the base game, but aside from that, it'd just be really cool to explore the track in free roam, especially the inside of the tree. Really reminds you of Nopon Village from Xenoblade Chronicles. Moving north, we enter this section that I'm sure you've been curious about. While this is still technically the forest, this is more specifically the Haunted Forest. Basically imagine the area around Boo's Cinema in the base game. Anyway, the next track here is Luigi's Mansion from Mario Kart DS. A track I'm sure a lot of you are happy to see. Once again, this is a track that I think would be really cool to explore in free roam. Heading east, we reach Broken Pier from Super Circuit. We kinda had to have at least one of these wooden board ghost tracks, and while Banshee Boardwalk from Mario Kart 64 was also available, I wanted to include more Super Circuit tracks, and Broken Pier is a track I'm sure most forgot existed. Heading further east, we reach this more volcanic area, and to no one's surprise, this is Bowser's Castle. Though the question is, which one? Since there's actually a few to pick from. 64, GameCube, DS, Wii, 3DS, a Deluxe, and 4 from GBA. Yes, 4. Literally every version that isn't Worlds or from the SNES. And of all of them, I chose the Wii version. Partially because it's one of my favourites, but also because parts of the track take place in or near a forest with a lot of dead trees. Sort of like that haunted forest we were just in. So its placement here works quite well. And finally, we reach the Special Cup, which starts over here at Yoshi Falls. Bit of an underwhelming track to start the Special Cup off with, but I hadn't put it in the cup yet, so I kinda had to go here. Besides, I'm sure Nintendo could do something to make it more interesting. Heading all the way over here near the desert, we reach the next track, Wario Coliseum. This is such a cool track, and I'd love to see it get remade in all its glory. And I do mean all its glory. As in, don't shorten the track length drastically like you did to Wario Stadium. I was legitimately looking forward to racing on Wario Stadium, only to find out they removed half the track. I'd really like if they didn't do that to Wario Coliseum. Now yes, Wario Coliseum is a long track, but you only have to do one lap. And even in the traditional 3-lap mode, you only do 2 laps on this track. Also, imagine all the cool stuff you could pull off on this track with stuff like wall riding and rail grinding. It'd be really cool. Heading south, we reach the big city of this DLC, the equivalent of Crown City in the base game. I'm sure some of you have guessed this already, but this is Mushroom City from Double Dash. Obviously, I've mentioned before that I like city tracks, so naturally Mushroom City was one of the first tracks I added. Not only would it be great to finally see this track be remade, but it'd also just be really fun to explore in free roam. And finally, we reach Rainbow Road. So the question is which one? Because there's a few to choose from. The GBA version, the DS version, the version from 8. And while I initially wanted to go with the GBA version, since I think more people need to experience it, I ended up swapping it out for the GameCube version. And to understand why, we actually need to go back to something I briefly mentioned at Luigi Circuit. So for some context, when I originally made my list of tracks, this is what it looked like per game. As you can see, there were 7 Super Circuit tracks, while GameCube, DS and Wii only had 3 each. So naturally, I swapped a couple tracks around. As I mentioned earlier, Peach Circuit got swapped for Figure 8 Circuit from Mario Kart DS, which left GameCube and Wii. Coincidentally, both games had a version of Luigi Circuit and Rainbow Road, and GBA had a Luigi Circuit and Rainbow Road that I could swap out. But since Mario Kart Wii's version of Rainbow Road was included in the Booster Course Pass, I gave Rainbow Road to GameCube, and that's why I went with the Wii version of Luigi Circuit earlier. But it's actually worked out quite well, since as I'm sure a lot of you are aware, in Double Dash, Rainbow Road is quite clearly shown to be directly above Mushroom City, and that's conveniently what the previous track was. So a pretty fitting end to the Special Cup. And that's all 8 cups covered. But there's also the knockout tours. Now I don't want to spend too much time going over them, so I'll just show you this map I made laying out all the paths, and hopefully it's clear enough to understand. Now one more thing I want to bring up real quick is a possible way to bring the total amount of tracks down from 32 to 30, since that's how many is in the base game. And it's actually quite simple. Mushroom City and Mushroom Bridge get merged into one track, and both Woohoo Island tracks get merged into one as well. And the specific track you race on depends on the cup you're in, since that's kind of how both Peach Stadium and Crown City work in the base game. But that's just one solution. Now there is one last thing I want to cover, and it's regarding why I didn't include any SNES tracks. And that's because my plan with them is to place them around the map as tribute tracks. If you're not aware, in the base world's free roam, you can find P-switch missions that allow you to race on tributes to several SNES courses. While there were a decent amount used, it wasn't all of them. The ones that were used were Vanilla Lake 1, in between Sky High Sundae and Warriors Galleon, Choco Island 1 and 2, both around Choco Mountain, Cooper Beach 1, right next door to Cooper Trooper Beach, and all three Ghost Valleys, which are right in front of Boo Cinema. This means that the ones that aren't yet used are Donut Plains 1, 2 and 3, Bowser Castle 1, 2 and 3, Vanilla Lake 2, Mario Circuit 4, yes, there is in fact a fourth Mario Circuit, and Rainbow Road, but obviously we're not counting that one. Let's start off with Mario Circuit 4, which I'm going to place close to the actual Mario Circuit. Meanwhile, the three Bowser Castles are obviously going to be around the actual Bowser's Castle, while Vanilla Lake 2, I'm putting roughly in between Sherbet Land and Ice Outpost. As for the three Donut Plains, I initially placed them around Moo Farm, but as I was writing the script, I realised they actually made a bit more sense being closer to Lakeside Park, so I've placed them in a sort of line in between the two tracks. And with that, I think I've covered just about everything I wanted to discuss with my ideas for a future World DLC. Now, do I think my ideas will become real? No, of course not. Not only would Nintendo not follow the same rules I have, but if they did make a DLC, they'd absolutely include some original tracks as well, instead of doing entirely retro tracks like I did. But it's still fun to think about. I'll leave images of the map I made for this, and several variations on screen if you want a better look, or want to screenshot them for your own use. But what did you guys think? What are some tracks you'd like to see get added in a possible Mario Kart World DLC? Be sure to let me know down in the comments. But that's going to do it from me here. Don't forget to like and subscribe, it really helps this channel out. Have a great day everyone, and I'll see you next time. See ya!